Hello and welcome to this special event to celebrate the publication of two wonderful books by two wonderful women. My name is Cathy Rensenbrink and it is my thrill to be here with you and with these two human beings who I admire very much as people and have just loved the chance to read their books, reread their books for this publication day event. So welcome to you, Joanna Cannon and Elizabeth Day. Thank you for being here with us.
Hello.
Thank you for having us. What a treat. What a perfect girl band, can I just say, the three of us make.
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
It's wonderful, isn't it? What could be a nicer thing than be together to discuss your wonderful novels? So, Jo, if I could start with you and a tidy ending, which I read in a gulp. I remember once having an argument on Twitter with someone about what it constituted when you say I've read it in a sitting. Literally, are you not allowed to go to the toilet? Literally, you're not allowed to put the kettle on. I will admit, if it's not too much information, I did do both those things, but otherwise it was a oneer and it was just a wonderful reading experience. Would you just bring us into it gently? Just tell us a little bit about it. Maybe start off, tell us a little bit about Linda and how she arrived with you.
Okay, this is the story of Linda, as you say. Linda is a middle-aged woman living in a very ordinary estate, living a very ordinary life with a husband she doesn't really love anymore, if she ever did to begin with. And they've just moved into a new house, and brochures and catalogues and interesting, glamorous things start arriving for the woman who used to live there. And Linda is looking through these brochures and thinking, this is the life that I should have had. This should have been me. So she decides to set out and claim the life that she believes she deserves. And on a backdrop of this, there are many women going missing on the estate, and her husband is keeping very odd hours. But Linda's more interested in rediscovering herself than she is in discovering what Terry might be up to. And this story came to me. I worked, if people don't know, I worked as a psychiatrist before I became an author. And I worked on the wards, and I also worked in outpatient clinics. And we see a lot of people with anxiety and depression. And as part of the history, you would say to them, can you remember how this started? And so many people would say, it started with something I saw on Facebook. And it's all to do with comparison and measuring yourself against other people and believing that your life isn't as good as their life, and these strange criteria we use to decide whether we're worthy or not. And I remember thinking at the time, there's got to be something in this, that we're all constantly comparing ourselves to other people, and with the power of social media, the whole world we can compare ourselves to. So I decided to invent this character called Linda, who's very socially awkward and very funny, but quite poignant really, because she represents a little bit in all of us, I think, that believe that we're not quite good enough.
Yes, and she's very clever, isn't she? And sharp, notices things a lot. It's very switched on in some ways, and then in other ways doesn't seem to have much awareness of the reality of situations she finds herself in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's the kind of person who never really fitted in at school, who wasn't very good at making friends, who keeps herself to herself. And in this day and age, keeping yourself to yourself is seen as quite a sinister thing. You will read in newspapers, if somebody does anything untoward, the neighbours will say, oh, well, I also, which is a bit strange because he kept himself to himself. To me, this is not a bad thing. I like that way of life, but apparently the media think it's a red flag. So Linda has lived quite a solitary life, and she's not terribly good in social situations, but she's a good observer, because she spent her life observing other people. And if you do that, you tend to pick up a knack of perhaps tuning into things that other people can't.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the reasons why it definitely for me really worked as a one-sitting read, I mean, I just had no interest in doing anything else or stopping or going to sleep or anything, was because it combined a sort of a thrillerish tension, but was also very was funny in places. Like, I thought it was really funny. Did you sort of set out to make it a funny book, or did that just kind of come through Linda's character?
I didn't set out, no, because I don't think I'm a particularly funny person, but people do find my writing amusing. So I think it's the voices, it's the characters that make the funny situations. I think if you set out to be funny, perhaps that you'll fall flat on your face. But if you let the characters develop and you get to know them, they end up in quite amusing situations. But I do love a thriller. I mean, I loved Magpie, for example. I absolutely adored it. But I would never have the courage to write an out and out thriller. So I stick to reading those. But I do like that thriller element. So there is a mystery and a tidy ending. But it's really kind of more character driven, more to do with Linda and her strange way of thinking.
And a very satisfying mystery. I won't obviously, as it's publication day, I think it would be unkind of me to our wonderful audience to reveal exactly what happens, but it's a real treat of a book. So Elizabeth, can we talk about Magpie? So it's your paperback publication day. So it was a real treat for me to reread Magpie, having read it several months ago. And I want to ask you, I think it's a difficult book to talk about what it's about without revealing the twist. So how do you tell me how that's been going? How do you talk about what it's about without revealing the twist?
It's going better now because I've had to come up basically with the elevator pitch that doesn't give anything away. But before I talk about Magpie, I just want to say how much I love Joanna and her writing and a tidy ending and like everything that you do and the observation that you bring to your work is so human and humane. And I really love that about you. I really do. And I think that your humor comes from that power of observation. And so it absolutely doesn't feel like you've gone out to try and be funny, which you're so right, is the worst thing a writer can do. But it's observational. I think that's why it works. Anyway, thank you both also for being so supportive of Magpie. It meant the world to me. So Magpie, the pitch that I've come up with is it opens with a character called Marissa, who is in her late 20s, and she's going through the dispiriting online dating. And she had quite a troubled upbringing, which we learn about through the course of the book. And she finds herself meeting someone that she instantly has a connection with, and he's called Jake. And he's financially stable and has a good job and seems thoroughly decent. And she can't quite believe her luck. So it all starts moving quite quickly, and they decide to move in together. And they decide quite quickly to start trying for a family together. And at that point, it turns out that Jake's work hasn't been going as well as you might anticipate. And so they decide to bring in a lodger in order to help make ends meet. And this lodger is called Kate. And she seems to take, to Marissa's eye, a curious and slightly sinister degree of interest in Jake and Marissa's private life. And it's about what happens from there on in. And it deals with themes of fertility and infertility, with mental health, and actually very similarly to what Joanna was saying, that idea that we have of comparison, that there's a life that we wish for, that we long for, that we picture in our minds as being somewhere where all of our problems are solved. And it's also about that and about what that represents for different women. And there's a monstrous mother-in-law character in the book called Annabelle, who is Jake's mother, who was a great deal of fun to write.
Yes, she's very enjoyable. And do you describe it as a thriller?
No, I don't. And it's really interesting. I've got no issue with it. I'm so flattered if people do think it's a thriller, because like Joanna, I feel I just would never be able to write one because a really great thriller is so hard to get right. And I think the people that I most admire in that genre, people like Kate Atkinson, who just do a terrific job in multiple genre, actually. But for me, I knew when I set out to write Magpie that I wanted there to be a twist, because I find twists so satisfying as a reader and a viewer. Like, some of my favorite films have amazing twists as well. And I wanted that experience to be really satisfying. And so I built the story and the themes around the twist that I knew was going to happen. And then I think it became, hopefully, thrilling to read. But I don't think it is a thriller because there are no dead women. Not with that. I mean, there's no grizzled detective with a complicated personal life. There's nothing like that. It's not police procedural, but I hope it's compelling and you never quite know where you stand. And I'm very into the whole notion of an unreliable narrator and the loving tricks we as authors can play on our readers. But I prefer to call it something like a compeller, if I can coin a new literary term.
Very nice, yeah. That's wonderful. I like that. And I would say compellers are my favorite books, really, because I really enjoy that thrillerish, page-turnery, compelling feel, which both your books deliver so brilliantly. But again, I don't massively want to be frightened, I find at the moment. There's a specific bit in Magpie, Elizabeth, where I felt there was again, almost like in a parallel universe, there was a more thriller version of the book that went off in a darker direction. And as a reader, I was so incredibly relieved that it didn't. Did you feel that that was a hinge moment that was saying something about the nature of the book and what you wanted to explore?
Definitely. And I'm so happy you said that, because I know that I have had a fair amount of people come to Magpie as a thriller and then feel disappointed by what happens in the final third. But it was a very, very deliberate decision, because I am a feminist and I want women to understand that there is more strength that comes from solidarity and connection and fighting the same fight than there is from division. And I think so many conventional thriller genres, there's so many sort of conventional examples of this kind of book would naturally veer towards pitting women against each other. And although there's a bit of that in Magpie, without giving too much away, I hope that by the end you understand that actually the underlying message is one of hope. And again, just as a reader, I like that in my books. I like to be left with a feeling of optimism rather than bleakness, although there is space for bleakness as well. I do like a relentless bleakness then and there. But yes, it was a very, very deliberate decision. And also I wanted to be very careful not to stigmatize the character in the book that has mental health issues. I didn't want that character to be easily pigeonholed as a monster, and because that's something that I feel very strongly against doing. So yes, for all of those reasons, it was quite a deliberate decision. I did have, because I wrote it during lockdown, the first national lockdown, and I did have great kind of plot consultations with my husband every evening. And it turns out he's an amazing plot consultant, and someone should hire him to write a kind of Netflix thriller, because he had a million different ideas of how certain people could like run off to South Africa and abduct certain people. But yeah, I didn't go down that route.
Well, I was very pleased. And I think one thing I've been saying a lot lately is that it's that thing of like, there's just enough going on in the world, isn't it? It's like that old joke about sex and violence. It's like, I get enough of it at home. I mean, not really, but when I'm reading at the moment, I find I want often a little bit of transportation. Can we talk about Magpies? Obviously, it's the title of yours, yes. Magpie action in a tidy ending as well. And I want to admit that the novel I'm writing is also full of magpies. Why is it we like magpies so much? They're fantastic metaphors, aren't they?
They're amazing. You know, I sent Elizabeth a message apologising for my magpie because
of you.
we discussed garden birds when we were discussing the kind of titles and things of the book. And there were quite a few garden birds around, including yours. And we put that to one side and went with a tidy ending. But when the book cover came out, it had a magpie on the front, and I went, "Oh my God, this is awful! I've stolen Elizabeth's magpie." So I immediately sent her an Instagram message apologising for the magpie content on my cover. It's lovely. They're kind of linked in a way, aren't they? And they look lovely together, all the colours.
They are linked. And actually, if you had stolen it, which you hadn't, it would be a very magpie thing to do, because they are bird-like. It's very on brand, because they have this whole mythology, which is based on the fact that they're attracted by dazzling, glittering objects. And so they have this reputation as nature's thieves, and that ties into the themes of my book and also Jo's, that thing of being attracted by an supposedly ideal life. But for me, like, I just think magpies are so beautiful, and I feel like they get a very unfair rep.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, it was part of like reclaiming the magpie for me, but it was also, I felt like they do have so much mythology and folklore around them that they're immediately captivating. And there is that famous rhyme, 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy. And again, that ties into the themes of Magpie. But did you know this? because I found this out when I was doing that thing that authors have to do now, where you're like pitching yourself to publications to be like, I could write this piece to publicize my book.
Yes.
And I just wanted to write a piece about magpies and how much I love them. Got turned down by everyone, by the way.
No.
I know. But one of the things that I discovered is that the Latin word for magpie is pica. And when they invented the industrialized printing presses, they were looking for terminology that would identify a specific kind of font or size of font. And it was called a pica after a magpie, because magpies are black and white. So it looked like the print on the white page. And I was like, oh, and it all comes full circle.
I did not know that. That's incredible. I just love corvids. I think they're all amazing. I love them. And I'm very proud of my magpie. And I love your cover. I think it's so striking, beautiful. Whoever was in charge of that at Fourth Estate did a damn fine job. Shout
out to Jo Thompson, who I think, I agree, like I love my cover. And I was so surprised when I met her, because she's like, she's a sort of in her, I think she's 24 and looks like a supermodel. And I was like, God, you're so young. And to have that kind of vision, I just imagined her being much older, because it was just such an incredible piece of work.
Yeah,
anyway.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful.
Beautiful.
That's all lovely. One of the things I thought was really interesting about both books was the sort of the portraits of marriage within it, various marriages. Perhaps, Jo, if you start. I'm not sure reading your novel would encourage anyone into marriage, but maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, so they don't have a happy marriage, Linda and Terry. I think they were kind of thrown together. And Linda at one point says that you get the first bus that comes along just in case there's another one. So she agreed to marry him, but she's obviously not happy. And I think you look at this the idea of marriage and children and family, and it's all part of this envy thing. And Linda obviously felt that she should get married. I mean, when I do interviews, the 3 questions I am always asked, not on interviews like this, but newspaper, magazine interviews, is how old are you? Are you married? Do you have children?
Wow.
And none of those questions are really relevant to what I'm talking about. And I had quite a discussion, shall we say, with a journalist yesterday who really wanted to know the answers to those questions. And I didn't give in. And I think we do look at this idea of a perfect marriage, from the outside looking in, or people with 2 kids or 3 kids, and we think, oh, that's what I should have had. I should have done that. And I think that's an element of Linda in that she looks at other people and thinks, I need to have a husband and I need to have children, because it's this ruler that we measure our lives by, that's created by society. And if we don't measure up to what we think we should, then we feel like we failed. So I think Linda perhaps bought into that idea, as we all do from time to time, and ended up with a very unhappy marriage.
I must say, I find it very inspiring that you get asked questions and don't answer them. I think I'm probably a bit, it never occurred to me that I could say, I'm not telling you. I might try it next time.
I don't think that's relevant. Like, my author didn't write this book, so why do you need to know that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that so much.
Yeah. Let's all go out and be less good. I love it. Be less compliant. Hooray! And what about you, Elizabeth? There's sort of a few relationships in the book to look at.
Yes. So I'm also very inspired by that answer, Jo, or the non-answer of it, because one of the things that I deliberately wanted to explore in Magpie was infertility, and what happens when you're confronted with the fact that something you think you've always wanted, parenthood, is denied you. The easy route to that is denied you. And so part of it is looking at the strain that places on a relationship, and the fact that it is, even though we might not want it to be, very gendered. So a man will have a different experience of a woman's infertility from the woman, obviously. And then alongside that, I also wanted to look at the tension that a woman places on herself, precisely picking up on what Jo was saying, when she might be struggling to conceive and she's scrolling through Instagram and seeing celebrities with their baby scans and their friend down the street with a kind of gender reveal party. And I sort of wanted to look into how we have this fetishization of particularly motherhood that actually denies all women the chance to live fully realized, kind of multifaceted, complicated existences where they might have lots of different feelings. So that played into it too. And then there is another marriage, which is Annabelle, the monstrous mother-in-law who I mentioned, and her husband, Chris, where Annabelle is such a strong presence that Chris becomes this sort of shadowy man who, not shadowy in a sinister sense, but he's sort of become a shadow of his former self. And so I suppose another aspect of womanhood I wanted to look at was, I hope I've slightly subverted the cliche of the kind of monstrous, domineering older woman wife figure, and where that might come from and what damage she might have experienced, or what damage she might have then given to her own family as a result of all of these stereotypes that we as women are constantly sort of forced to mold ourselves into. So yeah, those are all the relationships I looked at. And then I also had a lot of fun with the online dating side of thing as well, having been someone who's been through that. And, you know, and I've been through fertility struggles myself, and I speak really openly about that, but I didn't feel that I had read it in the way that I would have wanted to have read it in a novel at the time that I was going through it. And so I wrote that book, and that was the reason behind it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, for all that, I agree with everything you said.
Thank you.
Perfectly put.
Oh.
Well, no, I have had to mute people on Instagram. Kind of,
really? Me too.
People that I really enjoy seeing, and I'm happy for them, and that, you know, that it's wonderful, but for my own mental health, I have to mute things because it's just too distressing. And I think people forget that. I think they forget with this whole, and it stems from journalists asking ridiculous questions and newspapers printing ridiculous things. And like you say, the kind of stereotyping, which then goes through generations. And it all comes from that, and nothing ever changes. We never change anything. So I think writing a book like Magpie, where those stereotypes are smashed and you don't go down the predictable route at all, and you still pull off a cracking book, that is a step forward, in my opinion.
Oh, Jo, that's making me emotional.
Oh,
that means
bless you.
so much to me that you say that. Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to do, and to feel so seen by you. And I'm sorry for whatever pain you might have experienced, but I do exactly the same in kind of muting. And you're right, it doesn't take away from the fact that I'm happy for other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it feeds into a sadness for myself.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I'm protecting myself from.
Yeah, yeah. And it's everywhere. Even though you know it's there, and even though you know society is feeding you this diet, and you're aware of it, and you're aware of what's going on, you can't help but buy into it sometimes.
Yeah.
And you just have to, for the sake of your own mental health, you have to say, actually, no, I'm not looking at this anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. And there's going to be lots of people out there feeling the same, I'm sure.
Oh, thank you.
Do you both think that lots of sort of human dilemmas that are as old as time, like compare and despair, have just been given this new kind of really violent twist with social media? I was so interested in what you said, Jo, about seeing patients where this sort of the reason was something they saw in Facebook, and that we've kind of somehow been lulled into thinking it was just a way of making a family album public, and then sort of somehow accidentally making ourselves depressed and making everybody else miserable. And how do we make progress from that, other than people just having their own individual coping mechanisms?
Yeah, I honestly, I wish I knew the answer. I just know how damaging it can be, because I've spoken to people who start comparing their lives to other people online. I mean, before social media, you compared yourself to your friends and your colleagues, that was it. Now the whole world is available to you. And I think also the interactions on social media are unhealthy and can cause mental health problems. I mean, Twitter is the only place where I will spend all day justifying myself to complete strangers. So why am I doing this? Why do I bother engaging with people who are never going to see my way of thinking? Why am I trying to justify myself? And I think the judgment out there is incredible. You know, as human beings, we're not used to that much judgment. We're not used to hundreds of people. And once you get over a certain following, you get a lot of feedback from people. And we're not used to that amount of judgment. You know, you say the sky is blue and somebody will have an aneurysm and say it's actually grey. And they will spend all day shouting at you. And this is not healthy. So I think social media in itself has lots of problems, the comparison thing, the engagement thing, the tension and the kind of paper aeroplaning out hatred. And I think during lockdown, especially because people kind of reflected on themselves a lot and they perhaps didn't like what they saw, so then they projected this out into the internet. So there was a lot, once we got over the kind of banging saucepan lids with spoons and being kind to everyone, there became this real nasty backlash on social media as people started feeling more and more claustrophobic, I think.
That's fascinating.
I could see it happening. People who would not normally behave in that way we're finding it kind of mentally, physically claustrophobic, and we're kind of outpouring that anger into the internet. I mean, social media has wonderful qualities, and I've met amazing people through social media, and it kept me company during lockdown. But I think you have to go into it a little bit wise. And the best advice that I was ever given about social media was a consultant. You know, when people say something to me on there and I feel I've got to defend myself, I always feel as I've got to justify myself, explain myself, defend myself. I don't want somebody feeling bad about something I've said. And he said to me, Jo, not answering people is not a passive act. And I thought that is so helpful. It isn't a passive act. You can ignore someone and you're not being passive. So this is how I think of it now. I think I need to shut this down. I need to not engage. I need to not compare myself all over the place. And that's how I deal with it. But as a kind of a wider thing, I don't know how we deal with social media and the problems it's caused.
Yeah, except I think what we're doing, actually, I always feel it's a moral act. It's immoral because the forces of it saying like, this is all fantastic and it's your problem if you find it difficult, are so strong, aren't they? So even though I really know this and I've got lots of strategies, mainly which involve like very, very little and cherry picking and, you know, those things, you know, really choosing what I allow into my world. I always need to be continually reminded that this is an important and valid and good thing to do for myself. And I'm not some sort of, you know, fragile flower who, well, I mean, maybe I am a fragile flower, but I'm allowed to be a fragile flower.
You're allowed to be whatever you want.
Just let everybody, you know, give me the communication. So
but you're a creative, and that's the thing. When you're creating and you're observing, and a large part of that will be empathetic for all of us, it's very hard then not to take on other people's energies and emotional imbalances. And I completely agree with what both of you have said. I think we live in a culture where we're expected to respond 24 hours a day. And that has bled into how we lead our relationships, our friendships, and that idea of social media connecting us. Yes, I have had an amazing time on social media. I'm so grateful to Instagram for growing the podcast that I do. And it's amazing having a disintermediated access with readers and listeners. But if used wrongly, I think that social media masquerades as connection, but it's actually a purveyor of isolation and alienation, because you're constantly feeling like you're not doing the right thing or you're not doing well enough. And I use the mute button widely. And I do that thing of curating my feed, and I don't question myself. So I only follow people who bring me some sort of joy. And if someone isn't doing that, it's not their fault. That's my emotional baggage. So I need to be in charge of sort of dealing with that. But I don't know, it's been an interesting one lately as well. I just realized, I mean, you were talking earlier, Kathy, sorry, about going to the loo. And I just thought the other day, like, when was the last time I went to the loo without taking my phone with me? Because when we were young, we did that all the time. And it sounds ludicrous, but that was good thinking. thinking time. Like, when do we get our thinking time?
Mm.
I'm always looking at something or listening to something, and actually I just need to kind of disconnect.
Yeah, that's so true, because on journeys, I always think this when I'm going anywhere, because journeys used to be a pause between one place and the next. And now we're taking everything with us in a phone or a laptop or a tablet. So we never actually have those pauses to process things anymore. Because we get on a train and immediately the laptop comes out, or the phone, or the scrolling, or the answering people on Twitter, or the emails. And that pause for reflection and processing and the kind of understanding of information before you get to the next point of your life has gone. You know, it's a very weird and peculiar world. And I'm sure a lot of the problems that people are experiencing are because we don't have reflection time. I mean, I've started having the first hour of the day, I don't switch anything on. I don't switch my phone on. I don't have my laptop. I just sit and think about the day ahead and what I'm going to do. And that's my pause for reflection. But there's hardly any of it. We're encouraged with free Wi-Fi everywhere, you know, to be the person who never stops anymore. And that is so unhealthy.
Just quickly, because I know we're getting off track, but I interviewed Delia Smith recently for my podcast, and she has written this extraordinary and somewhat eccentric, in the best way, book about the meaning of life. So it's quite a departure from, you know, how to cook and stuff. But she said this thing to me. She was like, she was once taught by an Indian sage that the key to contentment and lifelong fulfillment is spending time with yourself every single day, ideally like half an hour, just you, no noise, just you sitting there. And she's like, you don't have to call it meditation, it's just time with yourself, because you need to get, that's the most important relationship you'll ever have. And I've been trying to do a bit more of that, just kind of exactly as you say, Jo, just silence.
Yeah, it's hard though, isn't it? Because I think anything like that, anything that protects our mental health is seen as self-indulgent.
Yeah.
You know, to sit there and not be working and not be scrolling your phone and not be active, to sit apparently passively in silence, just enjoying living in that moment, is we're made by society to feel that's quite self-indulgent. You should be getting on with whatever you've got to get on with today. And you know, you have to have these boundaries, I think, with technology and with social media and with work, especially working from home, which 99% of people have been doing. You have to find these boundaries and walls and protective mechanisms, or your mental health will be down the pan. Professional opinion, down the pan.
Yes, let's reclaim it here, and let's all think about how we can get that time with ourselves. Last question, because we're hurtling out of time. I obviously could talk to you both all day. I am completely obsessed with writers' routines, and it does feel it follows on a little bit from how we spend our time. So would you indulge me by telling me how you write your books? You both do lots of things. Tell us how you get it done. How does it work? Maybe you go, Elizabeth.
Well, I'm going to be annoying and say I don't have a routine. But
that's not annoying. That's a fascinating answer. Tell us about not having a routine.
So you're right that I do lots of different things. And when I wrote my first book, I had a full-time job as a Sunday newspaper journalist. So writing novels became something that I did in my own time, that I was so happy to give my own time to. So I would do it in lunch breaks in Costa Coffee in King's Cross, just down the road from the Observer where I then worked, and at weekends. And I would just fit it in around everything else. So it's always like I had one job to pay the rent, and then I fitted in writing. And then I think that became my MO, where because I'd started writing in Costa Coffee in my lunch breaks, I actually really like writing in cafes. I like being surrounded by the buzz of other people's conversations, because writing can be quite isolating and you can spend so much time in your own head and your own company that I like that. But it's one of those things that I think psychologically, I almost shy away from a routine because I still want to maintain the joy of it as much as I can, and just be like, oh, I'll just take out my laptop and do a few words. But that all changed during lockdown, obviously, because I was denied my cafe life. And I did have to establish a sort of routine just to, as Jo was saying, to kind of protect my own mental health. And so I set up a cafe in our spare room where I would listen to coffee shop sounds on YouTube. I put my phone on airplane mode, and I would make myself a cup of green tea, and I would go up every evening from about 5 till 7. I discovered I loved writing in the evenings. I've never had that luxury before because I'm normally doing stuff in the evenings. And it was like a golden hour. And I did that every day. And I loved it to the extent that when cafes reopened, I went to one, I was like, I took my laptop being like, and now I can write in a cafe. And it was too noisy. And I had to put my headphones on and listen to the same YouTube ambient coffee shop noises, which is hilarious. But that's as much of a routine as I'll probably give you. But two things never change. One is when I sit down at my laptop, I have a deal with myself that I have to write 1,000 words, and I have to, as much as possible, suspend judgment. If I think they're shit words, I just need to get to the 1,000 because I can always go back and re-edit the next day. And the other thing is that towards the end of novels, and sometimes at the beginning, if I can, I like to go away somewhere for at least a week where I just have my days. I'm not doing anything else other than writing. And that's a really good way of me getting like chunks done and being in the kind of creative zone. So those are my routines. Green tea is something that I always drink whilst writing.
Lovely, very good tips. Thank you. And what about you, Jo?
Well, I remember your post, Elizabeth, actually on Instagram, the first time you went back to a cafe after all the lockdowns, and you were like, I can go. It's amazing. I'm pretty much the same, actually, apart from I can't write in cafes and bars because I get too distracted. The sound of my own breathing sometimes puts me off my writing. So I don't particularly have a routine either. I tend to be an early morning person. If anybody follows me on Twitter, they will know I get up at a ridiculous o'clock, which is a hangover from medical school. And so I get up very early. I will sit and edit the 1,000 words because I also like to write 1,000 words if I can. So I'll edit the day before's writing before I feel I can move on. And really, as long as I've got a mug of tea and my dog, I'm happy. I don't have any other routine apart from that. So I edit as I go. I drink lots of tea. I talk to my dog. I read my work out to my dog because I always like to hear the words because I like the rhythm. I like to make sure the rhythm is right. So I'll sit and read to my dog and drink tea and look totally insane to anybody who might spot me. But that's my routine. But I think it's important not to, because when I first started writing, I was comparing, as we said about comparison, comparing myself to other people. How many words a day do you write? Like, what's your word count today? And I think people get obsessed with word counts and fixated on how many words they've written that day. And a lot of writing is just up here, and it's thinking, and it's like putting the dough in the airing cupboard when you're making a loaf of bread, and you just leave it to rise. And you think, I'm procrastinating, I must keep writing, but really that's all part of the process, is this thinking and reflecting and allowing your thoughts to settle. So if there's anybody out there writing, there are no rules. Don't compare yourself to anyone, and do what works for you, because that's the most important thing at the end of the day.
Preach.
That's lovely, isn't it? Yes, everyone can find their own way. Thank you, both of you, for being so generous with that and with everything. It's been a delight and a privilege to spend the publication day with you both for your wonderful novels. I'm going to give it a little flash for them. Of course, the finished copies will be looking a bit different, but Tidy Ending by Joanna Cannon. Look at that, the lovely little...
I've got the orange one here.
Both of them, you're so professional, thank you.
I've got the orange.
We go so well together. We go so well together in life as in books.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, sort of side-by-side design things. And also... lots of daffodils in Jo's book, which I'm very fond of daffodils, and I'm now looking askance at the daffodils on my mantelpiece. But thank you so much to both of you. Thank you very much, everybody, for being with us. I'm now going to go and make a mug of green tea and then read my work in progress aloud to my cats and see how that goes. So inspired do I feel by time with these wonderful women. So thank you very much to both of you. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you.